Thank you for joining us here. And yeah, let me kick in. Hopefully, we can have discussions at the end. So I want to invite you to listen with an attentive ear to at least engage at the end. So I'll present today with the end in mind that hopefully we can have conversations after the presentation. So today I have this privilege of sharing on a topic close to my heart, as you have heard, and that is benchmarking theological education in South Africa for the church. And I think that is key. So let me get into it and make sure that your afternoon is filled with something that I believe you are close to. You know, theological education, if it was not, you wouldn't be here. In fact, many of us are birthed, if you would, in so many ways through the efforts of theological education. I'll explain myself what I mean by that. So let's start from the top. A benchmarking in theological education basically refers to a structured process of evaluating key aspects of theological institutions. And I think this is key to mention that we are evaluating key aspects of theological institutions, not theological courses or theological content, but institutions. And I think that is key. So these institutions, what we're referring to, this is where theological education and training occurs at. And we can call them Bible schools, we can call them seminaries, whatever you call them. The fact is, this is where theological education happens at. Now, benchmarking focuses on critical components of such an academic programs, right? Because we're looking at faculty qualifications, we're looking at student services and support, we're looking at institutional management, we're looking at operational efficiency. All of these things are components that makes such an institution to be, I'm trying to find another word that is not in my face, but this is what makes it credible. This is what makes an institution to be an institution that we say, this institution, it is an institution of higher education. But I will tell you more about that. Now, this process is essentially a measure to identify best practices and also to highlight areas of improvement, thereby ensuring that theological institutions maintain a high standard of education while fulfilling their mission. Now, some key objectives of benchmarking in theological education include the following: enhancing educational quality. So in other words, whatever the content is, there is what you call education into that content. And so therefore, there could be better teaching methods that we need to evaluate. There could be learning outcomes across the institutions. We benchmark to help improve educational effort. And in South Africa, we have what you call the NQF system or framework. And so therefore, we want to make sure that what you're offering at the certificate level, it's appropriate for that level. Whatever you offer at NQF 10, NQF 8, it's appropriate for that level. The other key objective is increasing institutional effectiveness. And therefore, we're talking about streamlining administrative processes, optimizing resource allocation, to make sure that there is enough to make sure that the staff is paid, to make sure that the institution still survives tomorrow. The other point, which is my favorite, is driving the strategic innovation. Benchmarking can reveal innovative practices that can make theological institutions more relevant and more competitive in the educational landscape, because institutions of higher learning, there's high competition in that space. And therefore, we need to know, why should people study theological education? In fact, yes, we will say because they are called, but why must they study here and not there? And so therefore, if you benchmark, if it's all benchmark, if you have a standard to say, this is where a good looks like, this is where we start from, and therefore you are able to improve from that. But if there's no benchmark, then what are you improving? But you have to understand that benchmarking is not merely about comparison. It is a proactive tool for fostering continuous improvement. In other words, when it comes to improvement, when it comes to quality, you never arrive. It's a continuous journey. But you gotta be somewhere in order to continue from there. So theological institutions must not only keep pace with the best counterparts or the best pace of their counterparts, but also they must anticipate and adapt to the evolving needs of their students and the broader communities they serve. So you could be asking me, okay, Ntseno, what does this have to do with the church? Because your title talks about benchmarking theological education in South Africa for the church. Well, I'm glad you asked. See, the relationship between the church and theological education needs to be defended today. And I'm going to try to do that in a couple of minutes. The church, through private theological institutions, plays a pivotal role in theological education and training. As noted by Tidwell, the educational ministry of the church is so crucial that its absence could threaten the very essence of the church itself, and by implication, the very well-being of the communities the church serves. This is because the church's mission is deeply rooted in what we call the Missio Dei, the mission of God. And according to Prof. Damis, Missio Dei encompasses God the Father sending God the Son, the Father and the Son sending the Holy Spirit. Now, the Father, the Son, and the Spirit thus sent the church. And so it makes the church the sent one in commissioning, or rather in fulfilling this commissioned, this mission that they are sent to. And so therefore the church is thus a sent one participating in the divine mission. In fulfilling its educational mission, the church must align with what we now call national higher education policies. Because you see, we're offering education at a higher level, or rather at higher education level. Particularly in South Africa, where we have what you call the Higher Education Act 101 of 1997. I'll tell you more about this act. So, theological education in South Africa has undergone significant transformation due to external factors such as accreditation requirements, which have been a driving force in shaping our educational landscape. It was Landoni and Taxera who argued that higher education policies have evolved in response to socio-economical and political changes, which is a trend that is also evident in theological education. Similarly, Cole in 2020 emphasized that to fully understand the current state of theological education in South Africa, or rather in Africa, one must consider both academic context and the influence of contemporary church dynamics. The church we are serving today, its needs, its music, its makeup has changed considerably. And so therefore theological education needs also to consider those changes. Now allow me to give you back maybe more the context of South African landscape of higher education. You heard me earlier on mention the Higher Education Act 101 of 1997. So before 1997, theological institutions in South Africa enjoyed what we call autonomy in designing their own educational programs. However, with the introduction of what we now call the Council of Higher Education, others, for advising the Minister of Higher Education and Training on all matters related to higher education, as well as ensuring that there's an advancement of high quality standard throughout the higher education space. And they do this through their HEQC, which is the Higher Education Quality Council. And I think this is critical for us to understand that the creation of the CHE marked a significant shift in governance of higher education, addressing historical inequalities, which is primarily into their scope, and aiming to rebuild educational system in a post-apartheid era. Now, for theological institutions, this shift necessitated adaptation to national quality standards, accreditation processes, and institutional audits. Again, you could be asking, okay, sir, you are here and you are telling us about all of this. What does this have to do with research? Well, we conduct research aided by methods and frameworks. As a result, I'm approaching this subject of theological education and higher education using or coming from a practical theological perspective. And as a missiologist and a practical theologian, it is fitting for me to engage this on behalf of the church and to ensure that we, as the church, are responsible. Not only just responsible, but we engage with this in an academically sound manner. So let me tell you about this methods so that we can delve in, and those who are educationally appetite regarding methods and all that can be at peace. Missiological research, as I titled it so beautifully, is a respected means of exploring how the church works in a cross-cultural context. It plays a crucial role in understanding how church operates as it seeks to fulfill its mission in all different contexts. As a cross-cultural discipline, missiology investigates the method employed by the church as it participates in the Missio Dei. Dames and Bosch, they emphasize the close relationship between practical theology and missiology, arguing that theological education must be mission-orientated. Newberg in 86 further asserted that the church is the mission, highlighting the inseparable connection between theology and mission. So you see, we're now no longer just talking about education, we talk about missional education. Therefore, we seek to help Christians understand their identity as partners in God's mission. This approach of education contrasts with the more limited views that focus solely on personal spiritual formation, right? We realize that it's not just me getting education and a degree for myself. There's a bigger cause, there's a bigger mandate to achieve. This approach of education, it incorporates missional dimensions. So theological education becomes a holistic process that prepares students for ministry in a dynamic, cross-cultural world. And that means you're going to engage with other people from different subjects, different disciplines, psychology, education, and all that. And so therefore, we need to be present in those places and be not afraid to engage with them because we can engage with them. Now, to help you understand how now practical theology, missiological research, how did that come together into what we call now the South African higher education landscape? I may have to explain to you two things. The church, as it engages in mission, and one of its goals is to make sure that they use education. It's a tool. Education for the church is a tool. Tool to do what? It's an evangelistic tool. It's a missional tool. It's a discipleship tool. Yes, the church could use education to improve literacy, but also it has theological aims in it. Some churches, you will not preach unless you have some theological education. Now, governments or national governments, on the other hand, they are also into education, and their goals in education is driven by national development goals, economic growth, social stability ideals. Now, these two entities, they're approaching and they may come out with sometimes the same goal out because they would have trained you. But the truth is, they come from a different perspective. And so how do we solve this issue? How do we bring about understanding between what the church is trying to do and what the governments are trying to do? The church's mission is not in church buildings, by the way, but in the communities where the churches are. It's the same communities that the government seeks to serve also. Those communities are riddled by so many social ills, such as poverty, crime, inequality. The list is endless. Now, if that is our mission field, higher education and inequalities, we cannot turn a blind eye to it. And maybe I'll use that because that will be one issue that the church has been a participating agent in helping and solving over the years. Now, the issue of inequality in higher education, it remains a significant challenge, particularly in South Africa. See, the post-apartheid policies aim to redress those inequalities, trying to deal with issues of access in education. But many barriers, they continue to persist. Chetty and Petha highlight the disparities in talking about access, that access to higher education is based on race, class, and financial resources. Similarly, Sohole and Adeyemo argue for social justice approach to understanding inequalities that continue to affect higher education. And therefore, bringing all the scholars into the conversation about how then can we do this without the church losing its own mandate. Bosa draws a parallel between South Africa and Brazil, for example, noting how the two countries have a shared history of inequality and discrimination, and that creates a challenge for education. So I'm inviting you now to say, addressing these disparities through policy and practice remains crucial, and benchmarking can play a role in identifying solutions that improve access and equity in theological education also. And that brings me to the core of what it entails when you talk about benchmarking, and that is quality assurance. So in South Africa, like the rest of the continent, structured quality assurance processes in higher education and at national level are a recent phenomenon. There is, however, a convergence in methodology across different higher education frameworks. At national level, there are three types of quality assurance practices that can be observed. One, institutional audits, institutional accreditation, and program accreditation. Furthermore, different countries make use of different legal frameworks to govern their higher education system. For example, the UK aligns itself with what we call self-accrediting system. The US operates from a decentralized system of, and other countries like Europe, they use a state-guided through national legislation. South Africa seems to have adopted a mixed approach, as evidenced in the current migration from accreditation system to institutional audits that is aimed towards self-accrediting, as it's envisioned in the new CHE QAF. Now, that's a picture of higher education and also quality assurance. Now, theological institutions, many of which are rooted in ecclesial traditions, they must navigate these frameworks while maintaining their unique mission. Historically, theological schools have close relationship with the denominations that established them. And this relationship continues to influence the governance and educational philosophy of these institutions. And you may be asking, okay, I hear you, Ntseno, now what? Well, as mentioned earlier, practical theology, as Dames argue, is a crisis science that must address contemporary challenges such as the waning authority of Scripture and the disconnect between church and society. Theological education, it plays a central role in this task. According to Portia, theological schools have a unique opportunity to form future church leaders, both spiritually and intellectually, preparing them for effective ministry, and dare I say, preparing them for marketplace ministry. The success of theological education is directly linked to the success of the local church. As Bain and Hussey argue, education received by theological students today determines the future and the church tomorrow. It's telling, however, who cautions us that is the home where theological wisdom resides. Spiritual formation is a communal effort that requires collaboration between the church and theological institutions and the broader community. And so maybe that answers the question, why are we benchmarking theological education in South Africa for the church? Because, as I mentioned, theological education and theological wisdom has its home in the church, not at the seminary. Moe in 2019 suggests that theological education must evolve to meet the challenges of the future. The church and its educational institution must be proactive in embracing new strategies, new relationships, new expertise. But you love this quote about by Dockery, who reinforces this by advocating for a commitment of rigorous academic standards for institutions and faculty, coupled with a character and faith development. I want to move further on and say this to you. We have traveled, I've traveled with you this afternoon, telling you about practical theology, tell you about the goal of education. I didn't want to bother you with the screen. I want you to listen to me. I've told you about the CHE and all that. But I think it's important that we understand the bone of contention. As long as the church offers education that does not require to be acknowledged, in other words, that does not there's a words that are on your screen I want you to see. And I think these sentence is what brings even a challenge. The issues of qualifications. Yes, with rights and privileges associated with this distinction. If the church were to do education, and it doesn't have to be called a degree, a master's degree or PhD, where everyone has been called a doctor and all that, Well, the church can do that. No worries. No one is worrying. But the moment you start venturing into wanting qualifications that are in the same level as others, then there must be a distinct thing about you degree that someone has a degree in social economy or in economics. What is it that makes you to be on that level? What makes you have these rights and privileges if you didn't go through the same rigorous test? Because by affording you a particular qualification and particular NQF standard, we're saying this man, this woman has gone through all that it takes, and therefore he is on this level. And I understand issues of titles. Dr. Mudisa wrote enough on that. You can read on that. I understand all of that. But as I want to conclude, and I want to bring this home, do understand that the moment the church enters higher education, then the church must ask itself the following question, or at least these three fundamental. What are we? Are you simply a ministry? Are you a higher education institution? Are you a business? What are you? I want to invite the church to embrace this triad picture that at the primary level, we are a ministry. As a theological institution, we are a ministry, we're serving a ministry. So imagine a triangle. At the bottom, that's what we are. But we are a higher education institution. And therefore, we must adhere to higher education policies, higher education standards. And also, we must run a business. And we do this for the goal. What is the goal? For us, it's a missional goal. It's not just an education goal. It's not a business goal. It's a ministry goal. Benchmarking is a vital tool for ensuring that theological education in South Africa remains relevant, effective, and aligned with both academic and spiritual goals. By fostering continuous improvement, theological institutions can meet the evolving needs of their students, the church, broader community, ensuring that they remain at the forefront of both educational excellence and spiritual formation. A thesis that was written by Ntseno and supervised by Prof. Damis that was afforded in 2022 with the title Higher Educational Policies and Institutional Theological Education Needs, which was a practical theological exploration with a specific reference to private theological institutions in South Africa. There's a model that was developed by this. A model is called River Model. It's a recommendation that has been given to help institutions to navigate and flourish in the regulated space. Therefore, let me not repeat what's in that thesis. I'm sure you can Google and find it. But allow me to borrow and bring that to your attention as, so what? You've told us all these things, so what must happen? What must we do? The model is called River Model. And I'm sure you can see on your screen, if you go on your left, you can see River acronyms there and being described. So allow me to invite the church. There are principals, heads of churches. Allow me to invite you to the river. By this, I'm asking you to recognize, the R represents, to recognize on how to fulfill the mission day. I'm aware many Bible schools have been closed down, shut down, not able to function as higher education. But maybe in this crisis, there is an opportunity, there lies opportunities. I'm inviting you to the eye to imagine the new strategies on how to ensure that the church theological aims are reached. It's an invitation for you to visualize new systems. See, by new systems, we need to demonstrate quality. I encourage you that there's a new demand for expertise amongst us. You see, I believe as Bible-believing Christians, we are of the same kind as Daniel in the Bible, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Those are the Hebrew boys who are found to be 10 times better than the best. I believe when we apply biblical principles in higher education, we may actually exceed the very same standards that we have to adhere to that has kicked many institutions out of business. The R If we understand and embrace the above, this may lead us to a revolution in higher education and training, in how the church participates in academia and research. May I remind you, we are called to disciple every nation, in the pews or in the marketplace. I thank you.